My name is Evelyn Reed, and for years I believed my family was just complicated. Most families have their issues, right? But what if I told you that my parents, the very people who raised me, systematically froze me out of their lives financially and emotionally for over 2 decades? What if I told you their love came with an invisible price tag, a contract I never signed? And what if I told you that one day, a single official-looking letter slipped under my sister's door, ignited a firestorm that scorched everything we thought we knew about our inheritance, about loyalty, and about each other? It started subtly, a slow, chilling drift that felt almost imperceptible at first. My sister, Clara, always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I was the wild card, the artist, the one who dared to dream beyond our small-town expectations in upstate New York. I remember the day I announced I was moving to New York City for art school. My father, a man whose every word felt carved in stone, simply grunted. My mother, usually so effusive, offered a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. No fanfare, no proud send-off, just a quiet, almost dismissive farewell. That was the first crack in the foundation I'd always taken for granted. Years turned into a chasm. Holiday invitations stopped coming. Phone calls became one-sided, my voice echoing in the silence on the other end. Birthdays passed without so much as a card. Meanwhile, Clara was lauded, celebrated, showered with gifts, and taken on lavish trips to Europe. Each time I heard about another grand gesture, another expensive present, a fresh wave of resentment washed over me. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the blatant favoritism, the undeniable message that I was less, that I was unworthy. I tried to ignore it, to build my own life, to find my own family in the bustling chaos of the city. But the sting, the deep ache of feeling unwanted by your own flesh and blood, never truly faded. It festered, a slow-burning ember in my chest. Then came the phone call, years later, from Clara. Her voice was brittle, laced with a fear I'd never heard before. "Evelyn," she whispered, "you need to come home. Something terrible has happened. My parents were gone, taken in a sudden, horrific accident on a rainy stretch of highway just outside Buffalo. The shock was immense, a tidal wave of grief and confusion. But even in my sorrow, a flicker of something else ignited, a hope, perhaps, that with their passing, the Cold War between us would finally end, that perhaps, in their final wishes, they would acknowledge me, even just a little. I flew home, my heart a tangled mess of sorrow and a desperate, almost foolish optimism. The funeral was a blur of hushed condolences and forced smiles. Then came the reading of the will. The lawyer, a stoic man with a gaze as sharp as a razor, cleared his throat. He read through the usual formalities, the division of assets, the charitable donations. And then he came to the house, the family home, a beautiful colonial in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, filled with decades of memories. It was left entirely to Clara. The summer cottage, a place I'd spent every childhood summer, also to Clara. The significant financial investments, the bulk of their estate, all to Clara. My name was absent, completely, utterly, devastatingly absent. I sat there frozen, the blood draining from my face. It was as if a physical blow had landed, knocking the air from my lungs. Betrayal. It was a raw, visceral punch to the gut. They hadn't just excluded me, they had erased me. Every suppressed hurt, every quiet slight, every unspoken rejection coalesced into a burning fury. I looked at Clara, her eyes wide, her face pale. She seemed genuinely shocked, almost as stunned as I was. But then, as the lawyer continued, a small, almost imperceptible shift happened in her demeanor. A subtle tightening around her mouth, a flicker in her eyes. It was gone in an instant, but I saw it, and it ignited something dark and dangerous within me. I wanted answers. I needed to understand how my own parents could do this, how they could so cruelly write me out of their lives, even in death. This wasn't just about money, it was about worth, about belonging, about being seen. The injustice gnawed at me, consuming my thoughts day and night. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. The resentment had deepened into an obsession. I became a detective in my own life, sifting through old letters, forgotten photo albums, searching for a clue, a reason, anything to explain this profound abandonment. Clara, meanwhile, seemed to retreat, becoming distant, evasive. She claimed she knew nothing, that she was just as surprised as I was. But her words felt hollow, a flimsy shield against the growing suspicion in my heart. The truth, when it finally began to unravel, wasn't found in dusty boxes or forgotten journals. It arrived, as I mentioned, in a plain white envelope, slipped under Clara's door by a courier. A lawyer's letter. But it wasn't just any lawyer's letter. It was addressed to her, and what it revealed, what Clara then showed me, completely shattered my world and set me on a path from which there was no return. This wasn't just about my parents' will. This was about a deception so deep, so insidious, it had been woven into the very fabric of our family for decades. And when I finally understood the full scope of that betrayal, my quest for understanding transformed into an unyielding demand for justice. This letter, this single piece of paper, was the key that unlocked a Pandora's box of secrets, lies, and a revenge that would either break me or finally set me free. What was in that letter? And what desperate lengths would I go to finally claim what was rightfully mine? My name is Alara, and for as long as I could remember, our family home in the sprawling suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a carefully constructed stage. My parents, Robert and Susan, were masters of appearances, always ensuring their perfectly manicured lawn and pristine facade reflected the image of success they so desperately cultivated. My older sister Bethany was their golden child, a shimmering reflection of their ambition, excelling in everything from academics to equestrian sports. I, on the other hand, was merely Alara, the quiet observer, the one who preferred the dusty comfort of old books to the dazzling spotlight my sister commanded. From a young age, I understood my place. Bethany's achievements were celebrated with lavish parties and expensive gifts, while my own modest victories, like winning the school's creative writing contest, were met with a perfunctory nod. It wasn't overt cruelty. It was far more insidious. It was the subtle exclusion, the unspoken preference that etched itself into the very fabric of my being. Dinners often revolved around Bethany's latest triumph, her college applications to Ivy League schools, her future as a high-powered attorney. I'd sit there pushing food around my plate, a ghost at my own family's table. The resentment simmered beneath the surface for years, a low, persistent hum that I tried to ignore. I convinced myself it didn't matter, that their approval wasn't necessary for my own happiness. I poured my energy into my studies, earning a scholarship to Arizona State, a respectable achievement that still paled in comparison to Bethany's full ride to Harvard. Even then, the difference in their reactions was stark. Foe. Our Bethany. It was an expected victory, for me, a mild surprise. The real shift, the seismic crack in the foundation of my perceived reality, came just a few months ago. My parents had always been secretive about their finances, a common trait among the wealthy, I suppose. They owned a successful chain of boutique hotels across the Southwest, a testament to their shrewd business acumen. We lived comfortably, even extravagantly, but discussions about wills or inheritances were strictly off limits, deemed vulgar and premature. Then, out of nowhere, my father suffered a massive heart attack. It was sudden, brutal, and left him in a coma. The family was thrown into chaos. Susan, usually so composed, became a frantic mess, her perfect facade crumbling under the weight of genuine fear. Bethany, ever the pragmatist, immediately took charge, handling hospital logistics and communicating with doctors. I, true to form, felt like an extra in their unfolding drama, offering quiet support where I could but mostly feeling the familiar ache of being on the periphery. During this tumultuous period, while my father lay unconscious, My mother, in a moment of overwhelmed vulnerability, mentioned needing to locate their lawyer, Mr. Harrison. She spoke of important documents that needed reviewing, especially with Dad's health so uncertain. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I knew, instinctively, this had something to do with the inheritance, something that would solidify my fears. A few weeks later, after my father had miraculously stabilized and was slowly, painfully beginning his recovery, the lawyer's letter arrived. It was a thick, official-looking envelope, emblazoned with the firm's elegant logo. My mother opened it at the breakfast table, her hands trembling slightly. Bethany sat across from her, sipping her green smoothie, a picture of calm confidence. I was there too, nursing a lukewarm coffee, trying to appear nonchalant, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. My mother read the letter aloud, her voice wavering. It outlined the preliminary details of their updated will, a necessary step given my father's recent health scare. As she read, the words blurred into a chilling certainty. The bulk of their considerable estate, the hotels, the properties, the investment portfolios, it was all meticulously divided, primarily between my mother and Bethany. There were specific trusts, detailed clauses and percentages that I couldn't quite grasp through the haze of my rising anger. Then, she reached my name. My stomach clenched. And to Alara, my mother read, her voice suddenly softer, almost apologetic, a modest sum of $50,000 to be placed in a restricted account, accessible only upon reaching the age of 30 or for documented educational expenses. $50,000. For me, a paltry sum, a benevolent handout, compared to the millions allocated to my sister. It was a slap in the face, a public declaration of my worth in their eyes. It wasn't just the money, it was the blatant, unequivocal message it sent. I was not truly family, not in the same way Bethany was. I was an afterthought, an obligation, barely worthy of a footnote in their grand legacy. A suffocating wave of pure, unadulterated resentment washed over me. It wasn't just the monetary exclusion, it was the final undeniable proof of their lifelong favoritism. The stage was set, and I was not a star, nor even a supporting actor. I was merely a prop, easily overlooked, easily discarded. The familiar ache in my chest transformed into a burning fury, a desperate need for something to shift, something to break this suffocating mold they had cast for me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about finally being seen, finally being valued, even if it meant tearing down the very foundations of their carefully constructed world. The sting of that realization, the cold, hard truth that I was nothing more than an afterthought, propelled me into a new phase of my life. I couldn't simply exist in their shadow any longer, a forgotten portrait gathering dust in the attic of their perfect lives. The anger that had been a low hum now roared, a wildfire consuming my carefully constructed apathy. I started digging, not in the dirt of our sprawling backyard, but through the digital footprints and hushed conversations I'd overheard throughout the years. My parents were meticulous, but even the most careful architects leave blueprints. My first target was their financial advisor, a man named Mr. Henderson, whose name I'd heard whispered in hushed tones during various holiday gatherings. He was a family friend, or so I thought, someone who had managed their considerable wealth for decades. Accessing public records, a surprisingly simple task for someone with a knack for research and a growing obsession, revealed a web of shell corporations and offshore accounts. It wasn't illegal, not exactly, but it painted a picture of a family far wealthier and far more secretive than I had ever imagined. This wasn't just about their carefully curated image. It was about an empire built on foundations I was only just beginning to understand. A chance encounter at a local coffee shop provided my next lead. I saw Mr. Henderson, a man I'd only ever seen in tailored suits, looking surprisingly disheveled, arguing vehemently on his phone. He mentioned the trust and Bethany's future in a voice laced with frustration. My ears perked up, a jolt of electricity coursing through me. I knew my parents had set up trusts for both of us, or so they'd always claimed. But the way he spoke, the urgency in his tone, suggested something far more intricate, far more biased. I decided to approach him directly, a risky move, but the fire in my gut wouldn't let me back down. I waited until he was alone, nursing a lukewarm coffee, and approached his table. "Mr. Henderson," I began, my voice steadier than I felt, "Alara. Robert and Susan's daughter." He looked up, startled, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, surprise, perhaps a touch of fear. We exchanged pleasantries, a dance of polite lies, before I steered the conversation. "I was wondering," I continued, leaning forward slightly, "about the family trusts. My parents have always been rather vague about the details." His demeanor shifted, a subtle tightening around his mouth. "Your parents handle all those specifics, Alara," he replied, his voice suddenly guarded. "It's all in order." But the way he avoided my gaze, the slight tremor in his hand as he picked up his coffee cup, told me otherwise. I pressed on, my resolve hardening. "I understand, but as a beneficiary, I should have some access to information, shouldn't I? For future planning, of course." The lie tasted bitter but necessary. He hesitated, then sighed, a sound of defeat. "Look, Alara, your parents have very specific instructions regarding your trust. It's different from Bethany's." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Different. The familiar sting of exclusion, but this time it was laced with something far more sinister. "How different?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, a tremor of ice running through my veins. He glanced around the coffee shop, as if afraid of being overheard. "Bethany's trust is active, substantial, and accessible to her upon turning 25, with provisions for her Harvard education and future endeavors. Yours, on the other hand, is contingent. Very contingent. Contingent." The word echoed in my mind, a cruel joke. "Contingent on what?" I demanded, my composure finally cracking. He lowered his voice further, leaning in. "Upon you demonstrating a commitment to family values and adherence to their established legacy. It's essentially a discretionary fund, Alara. They hold all the cards, and frankly the principal amount is significantly less." My blood ran cold. Significantly less. It wasn't just about being overlooked. It was about deliberate, calculated disparity. My parents hadn't just preferred Bethany. They had actively ensured I would never truly be financially independent, always tethered to their whims, always at their mercy. The conversation ended abruptly, Mr. Henderson clearly uncomfortable and unwilling to divulge more. But he had given me enough. The pieces of the puzzle began to snap into place, forming a picture of systematic favoritism, a deliberate act of financial disenfranchisement. Bethany wasn't just the golden child, she was the sole heir, the chosen one, while I was relegated to a perpetual state of financial purgatory, dependent on their arbitrary approval. The resentment I felt before was a mere flicker compared to the raging inferno that now consumed me. They hadn't just excluded me, they had manipulated my future, ensuring I would forever be beneath Bethany, forever striving for their unattainable approval. This wasn't just about money, it was about control, about power, and I was determined to wrest it back. I left the coffee shop in a daze, the city sounds blurring into a dull roar. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless and raw. My parents, the paragons of suburban success, had orchestrated a cruel, elaborate deception. They had built Bethany an empire while offering me crumbs, contingent on my good behavior, on my willingness to conform to their suffocating expectations. The pain was immense, but beneath it, a steely resolve began to form. They wanted a legacy? I would give them a legacy, one they would never forget, one that would expose the rot beneath their polished facade. This was no longer just about feeling hurt. It was about fighting for my own existence, for my own worth, against the very people who were supposed to cherish me. The game had changed, and I was finally ready to play. The initial sting of the lawyer's letter had faded, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. This wasn't just about money. It was about recognition, about finally carving out my own space in a family that had always deemed me secondary. My parents, in their endless pursuit of an idealized legacy, had made a critical miscalculation. They believed their control extended to my very identity, but they had inadvertently handed me the very weapon I needed. I began my research methodically, poring over public records, property deeds, and corporate filings. Their wealth, while substantial, was intricately woven into a web of shell corporations and offshore accounts, a common practice among the elite to minimize tax burdens and obscure true ownership. This wasn't just about proving a point, it was about dismantling their carefully constructed illusion. I started with the most obvious target, the family foundation. On paper, it was a philanthropic endeavor, a testament to their generosity. In reality, it was a tax shelter, a convenient way to funnel money and maintain a veneer of public service. My parents often bragged about their charitable contributions, especially Bethany, who frequently attended their elaborate galas, radiating an air of self-importance. I remembered one particular event, a glittering affair held at the Phoenix Art Museum, where Bethany, draped in a designer gown, had accepted an award on their behalf, her speech filled with platitudes about giving back. I had watched from the periphery, a forgotten shadow in a sea of flashing cameras, the irony a bitter taste in my mouth. My initial inquiries were met with polite but firm resistance. Lawyers, accountants, and public relations firms formed an impenetrable wall around my parents' financial empire. They were experts at deflection, at making inconvenient truths disappear. But I had an advantage. I knew their weaknesses, their vanities, their deepest fears. I knew that beneath the polished exterior lay a desperate need for public approval, a terror of scandal that could unravel their carefully curated lives. My strategy began to take shape, a slow, methodical chipping away at their defenses, designed to expose the hypocrisy at the core of their existence. The first step was subtle. I began anonymously leaking snippets of information to a local investigative journalist, a tenacious reporter known for his relentless pursuit of truth, especially when it involved prominent figures. I didn't reveal everything at once, just enough to pique his interest, to plant seeds of doubt. The initial story was innocuous, a question about the foundation's seemingly low charitable payout ratio compared to its administrative costs. It was a small crack, but a crack nonetheless. My parents, of course, dismissed it as a minor inconvenience, a disgruntled employee perhaps, or a rival trying to stir up trouble. Bethany, ever their loyal defender, publicly denounced the article as slanderous and baseless. Her outrage was almost comical, given how little she truly understood about their finances. The real turning point came when I discovered a series of questionable transactions involving a piece of land in Scottsdale that had been donated to the foundation at a vastly inflated price. This wasn't just tax avoidance, it bordered on outright fraud. The paper trail was convoluted, designed to confuse, but years of observing my father's meticulous, almost obsessive, record-keeping had given me an unexpected insight into his methods. I spent weeks cross-referencing documents, piecing together the puzzle, each discovery fueling my resolve. The anger that had simmered for so long now burned with a focused intensity. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about exposing the rot, the corruption that festered beneath their perfect facade. I remembered a conversation with Bethany years ago, after she'd just graduated from law school. She had been so proud, so full of righteous indignation about corporate malfeasance. "The law is a powerful tool, Alara," she had declared, "to right wrongs, to ensure justice." I wondered if she still believed that, or if her idealism had been swallowed by the gilded cage of our family's expectations. The irony was not lost on me. I was now using the very principles she once espoused to bring down the empire she was so eager to inherit. The journalist, now fully engaged, began digging deeper. My anonymous tips provided him with the crucial leads, the threads he needed to pull. The second article was far more damaging, hinting at potential tax evasion and self-dealing within the foundation. The phone calls to our family home, once filled with congratulatory messages for Bethany's latest achievement, now carried a different tone, a nervous edge. My mother, usually so composed, began to fret about their public image, about the gossip swirling around their names. Bethany, for the first time, seemed genuinely flustered, her perfect composure cracking under the pressure of public scrutiny. The game had truly begun, and I was holding all the cards. I watched from the shadows, a quiet architect of their unraveling, the resentment now a powerful engine driving me forward. The silence that had always defined my presence in their lives was about to be broken, not by words, but by a symphony of their own undoing. The silence that had always defined my presence in their lives was about to be broken, not by words, but by a symphony of their own undoing. I knew Bethany's perfect facade, her carefully constructed world, relied on the illusion of control. My plan was designed to dismantle that control, piece by agonizing piece. The first small tremor had been the public exposure of her questionable business dealings, a strategic leak that sent ripples through her carefully curated social circles. I watched, unseen, as her perfectly coiffed hair seemed to droop. Slightly, her confident smile faltered during an interview on a local Phoenix news channel. She stammered, her perfect composure cracking under the pressure of public scrutiny. The game had truly begun, and I was holding all the cards. I watched from the shadows, a quiet architect of their unraveling, the resentment now a powerful engine driving me forward. My next move was far more personal, aimed directly at the heart of their perceived legacy. I had spent weeks meticulously compiling a dossier, not just on Bethany, but on my parents' own less-than-ethical business practices. Their real estate empire, built on a foundation of shrewd deals and questionable evictions, was ripe for exposure. I found the perfect recipient, a tenacious investigative journalist known for her no-holds-barred approach to corruption in the Phoenix metropolitan area. I sent the anonymous package, filled with carefully redacted documents, encrypted emails, and photographic evidence, all pointing to a pattern of predatory behavior. The accompanying letter, crafted to sound like a disgruntled former employee, was a masterpiece of plausible deniability. The article hit like a bombshell. It wasn't just a local news blurb. It was a front-page exposé in the Arizona Republic, detailing how Robert and Susan had systematically exploited vulnerable tenants, bought up properties for pennies on the dollar, and then flipped them for exorbitant profits, often leaving a trail of broken promises and ruined lives. The headline screamed, "Phoenix Power Couples. Empire built on shaky ground," and the accompanying photo showed my parents, looking stiff and uncomfortable, at a charity gala, their forced smiles now seeming grotesque. The piece meticulously outlined their tactics, even touching upon Bethany's involvement in some of the legal maneuvering that had protected their assets. The fallout was immediate and spectacular, their carefully cultivated image of philanthropic success shattered. Calls from their usual charity boards and social clubs dried up. Their names, once synonymous with prestige, were now whispered with disdain. Bethany, who had always thrived on public adoration, found herself the subject of uncomfortable stares and hushed conversations. I saw her at a grocery store one afternoon, looking haggard, her designer sunglasses doing little to hide the dark circles under her eyes. She clutched a gallon of milk, her usual air of effortless superiority replaced by a strained anxiety. It was a small victory, but deeply satisfying. The true turning point, however, came with the letter. Not just any letter, but one from a prominent law firm specializing in elder abuse and financial fraud. I had orchestrated its arrival with surgical precision, ensuring it landed on my parents' doorstep just as the media storm reached its peak. The letter outlined a class action lawsuit, initiated by several of the families they had displaced, demanding restitution and punitive damages. The sheer scale of the potential financial ruin was staggering, threatening to unravel not just their current wealth, but their entire future. I had even subtly guided the lead attorney to some of the more egregious cases, ensuring the lawsuit had undeniable teeth. My parents, usually so composed, began to crack under the pressure. Their phone calls, once reserved for polite social engagements, now consisted of frantic consultations with their own legal team. The house, usually filled with the sounds of their extravagant parties, became a tomb of whispered arguments and palpable tension. Bethany, caught in the crossfire, found her own burgeoning legal career in jeopardy. Her firm, eager to distance itself from the scandal, had quietly begun to sideline her. Her name, once her greatest asset, was now a liability. Then came the meeting. I received a text from Bethany. Terse and uncharacteristic. "We need to talk. Urgent." It wasn't a request, it was a demand, laced with an unfamiliar desperation. We met at a neutral coffee shop, far from our usual stomping grounds. Bethany looked utterly defeated. Her posture was slumped, her eyes red-rimmed, and her voice, usually so commanding, was barely a whisper. She laid out the full extent of the disaster, the mounting legal fees, the freezing of assets, the very real possibility of losing everything. She even admitted, through gritted teeth, that my parents were blaming her for some of the legal oversights that had left them so exposed. The golden child was tarnished, and the cracks in their perfect family facade were now gaping chasms. "Alara," she began, her voice raw with uncharacteristic emotion, "I don't know what's happening. Everything is falling apart. Mom and Dad, they're not themselves. They're terrified. And I don't understand why this is happening now." She looked at me, her eyes searching, pleading. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in Bethany's eyes, not just annoyance or frustration, but a deep, primal fear of losing everything she had ever known. It was a moment I had anticipated, a moment I had meticulously engineered. I met her gaze, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. The silence hung heavy between us, pregnant with unspoken truths. The symphony of their undoing was reaching its crescendo, and Bethany, my golden sister, was finally listening. Bethany's face, usually so composed, was a canvas of disbelief, then dawning horror. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving them ashen. Her hand, trembling slightly, reached for the documents I had placed on the polished mahogany table. She scanned the pages, her eyes darting across the legal jargon, her breath catching in her throat. I watched, a silent observer to her unraveling, the years of quiet resentment finally finding their voice in the rustle of those papers. This wasn't just about money. It was about the fundamental unfairness that had defined my existence within this family. "What is this, Alara?" Her voice was barely a whisper, laced with a fear I had rarely heard from her. Bethany, the golden child, the one who always had an answer, was lost. "It's the truth, Bethany," I replied, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor that would have betrayed me years ago. "A truth carefully concealed, designed to ensure you inherited everything, while I received nothing." I saw the exact moment comprehension dawned in her eyes, a flash of painful understanding. She remembered the hushed conversations, the sudden trips my parents had taken, the evasiveness when I had innocently inquired about their estate planning. She had been a part of it, perhaps unknowingly, but a beneficiary nonetheless. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, not of sorrow, but of profound shock. "But why?" she stammered, looking up at me, her gaze pleading for an explanation I was no longer willing to soften. "Why?" I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Because that's how it's always been, hasn't it? You, the chosen one, deserving of every advantage, every privilege, and me, the afterthought, the inconvenient truth they wish to erase." The words, once so heavy with pain, now felt liberating. Each syllable was a brick in the wall I had built between us, a wall that was now crumbling, exposing the raw foundation of our relationship. She pushed back from the table, rising slowly, her eyes wide with a dawning realization that transcended the financial implications. Our parents, they wouldn't, she whispered, more to herself than to me. The carefully constructed narrative of our perfect family, of their unwavering love, was shattering before her very eyes. It was a narrative I had been forced to live with, to pretend was real, while she had basked in its warmth. Oh, but they would, Bethany. They did, I countered, my voice hardening, and they did it with such meticulous planning, such cold calculation, that it leaves no room for doubt about their intentions. I watched her, really watched her, for the first time in years, not as my sister, but as a person finally confronting the ugly reality of her own privilege. The shock gave way to a flicker of anger, then a profound sadness. "You've known about this for how long?" she asked, her voice gaining a little strength, a hint of the old Bethany returning, trying to assert control over a situation spiraling out of her grasp. "Long enough to understand the depth of their betrayal," I stated plainly. "Long enough to understand that the only way to truly be free was to expose it, to dismantle the entire charade." The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with years of buried resentments finally seeing the light of day. This wasn't a conversation, it was an excavation. Her gaze fell back to the documents, her fingers tracing the bold print. "What do you want, Alara?" The question hung in the air, loaded with the weight of our shared yet vastly different histories. She expected a demand, a negotiation, a pound of flesh. She expected the transactional nature that our parents had instilled in every aspect of their lives. "What I want, Bethany, is for the truth to be known," I replied, my eyes locking with hers. "I want them to face the consequences of their actions, not just legally, but morally. I want them to understand what it feels like to be overlooked, to be dismissed, to be deliberately excluded from your own family's legacy." My voice, though calm, carried an undeniable force, the culmination of decades of silent suffering. She flinched, as if struck. The implication was clear. This wasn't about money for me. This was about justice, about an acknowledgement of my existence that had been denied for so long. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her perfect world, built on a foundation of parental favoritism and financial security, was crumbling, and I was holding the hammer. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the echoes of our fractured past and the uncertain future. The golden child, stripped of her gilded cage, was finally seeing the world through my eyes, and the view was devastating. The weight of that silence pressed down on all of us, a suffocating blanket woven from years of unspoken truths and bitter resentments. Bethany, her face a mask of disbelief, finally broke the stillness. Her voice was thin, reedy, utterly devoid of its usual confident cadence. This can't be right, Alara. They wouldn't do this to me." I met her gaze, no longer flinching from the raw emotion swirling in her eyes. "Wouldn't they, Bethany? Or wouldn't they do it to the person they always told you were? The one who was destined for everything, who deserved the world without lifting a finger?" The words felt like shards of glass, each one a tiny cut, but I couldn't stop them. Years of suppressed pain fueled my every syllable. "You saw the letter. You saw the dates." This wasn't a sudden decision. It was a calculated move, made long before I ever even considered law school. My mother, always the first to recover her composure, though her hands still trembled slightly, stepped forward. "Alara, darling, you're misunderstanding. This is a temporary measure, a way to motivate Bethany, to ensure she truly appreciates her opportunities." Her voice was a practiced balm, but the cracks were showing. "Motivate her?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "By taking away everything she believes is her birthright. By showing her that the golden parachute isn't as guaranteed as she thought. And what about me, Mother? What was my motivation for all those years? Was it to prove that even without your endless resources, I could still build something for myself? My father, who had remained unusually quiet, finally spoke, his voice gruff. Alara, that's enough. You've made your point. Now let's discuss this rationally. Rationally. I turned to him, my eyes burning. There's nothing rational about a lifetime of favoritism, Father. There's nothing rational about one child being showered with opportunities while the other is told to be grateful for scraps. This isn't about rationality, it's about consequence. It's about facing the reality of what you've created. Bethany, who had been staring blankly at the lawyer's letter, slowly crumpled it in her hand. The sound was stark in the quiet room. Her eyes, when they finally lifted to mine, held a new, unfamiliar expression. Not anger, but a dawning, terrible understanding. You knew, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You knew about this all along, didn't you? A knot tightened in my stomach. The truth, in its rawest form, was a heavy burden. I found out. I saw the documents. And I waited. You waited for this moment, she accused, a flicker of her old fire returning, though it was quickly extinguished by the overwhelming shock. You waited for me to lose everything so you could gloat. No, Bethany, I said, my voice softening slightly, though the resolve in my heart remained firm. I waited for you to understand. I waited for you to see what it feels like to have your future, your security ripped away from you. I waited for you to understand what it feels like to be overlooked, to be disposable in the grand scheme of their perfect family image. My parents exchanged a panicked glance. This wasn't the script they had envisioned. This wasn't the controlled environment they usually manipulated. Bethany, their perfect daughter, was unraveling before their eyes, and I, their forgotten one, was holding the threads. We can fix this, Bethany, my mother pleaded, reaching out a hand, but Bethany recoiled as if burned. Fix what, Mother? Bethany's voice was laced with a bitterness I'd never heard from her. Fix the fact that you built my entire life on a lie, that everything I thought I was, everything I thought I had, was conditional. That it could all be taken away in an instant because you decided I needed a lesson? Her gaze swung back to me, and for the first time I saw not just anger, but a flicker of something akin to respect, or perhaps just a desperate recognition of shared pain. You played a long game, Alara. A very long game. It wasn't a game, Bethany, I corrected her, my voice steady. It was survival. It was learning to navigate a world where I was always second best, always an afterthought. And it taught me to rely on myself. To build my own foundation, brick by painstaking brick. The air in the room was thick with unspoken words, with shattered expectations and the raw aftermath of a truth finally revealed. My parents stood there, their carefully constructed facade crumbling around them, exposed and vulnerable. Bethany, the golden child, was no longer shining. She was merely Bethany, a woman grappling with a reality far harsher than any she had ever known. I looked at her, at the wreckage of her perfect world, and felt a strange mix of emotions. There was no triumph, no elation, only a profound sense of bittersweet closure. The resentment that had gnawed at me for so long had finally found its release, but the cost was the final, irreversible fracturing of my family. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't suffocating, it was the quiet after a storm. The stillness of a landscape irrevocably changed. I had sought justice, and in a way, I had found it. But the victory felt hollow, a monument built on the ruins of what could have been. The lessons learned were etched deep, a permanent reminder that some victories come with a heavy price, and that true strength is often forged in the shadows, far from the blinding glare of the spotlight. The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by the rustle of legal papers and the frantic scribbling of the court reporter. My parents, red-faced and flustered, looked like they'd just seen a ghost. My sister, Sarah, sat beside them, her usual composed demeanor shattered, tears streaming down her face. The lawyer's letter, a stark declaration of my rightful claim, lay open on the polished mahogany table, its words echoing the truth they had so desperately tried to bury. This wasn't just about money. It was about finally being seen, finally being acknowledged. The judge's gavel struck, a sound that reverberated through my very bones, signaling the end of an era and the beginning of another. The court had ruled in my favor. The meticulously crafted trust, designed to exclude me, crumbled under the weight of irrefutable evidence I had spent months gathering. My parents' faces, etched with a mixture of disbelief and fury, were a sight I'd once dreaded, but now they held no power over me. Their betrayal had forged an iron will within me, a resolve they never anticipated. Leaving the courthouse, the crisp autumn air felt different, cleaner somehow. The weight I'd carried for years, the invisible chains of their rejection, had finally shattered. Sarah, surprisingly, caught up to me on the steps. Her eyes, swollen and red, met mine with an unfamiliar blend of shame and regret. "Bethany," she whispered, her voice cracking, I didn't know it would come to this. They told me you didn't care, that you'd moved on." Her words were a flimsy shield against the years of complicity, but for the first time I saw a flicker of the sister I once knew, buried beneath layers of their manipulation. "You chose your side, Sarah," I replied, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor it once held in their presence. "You saw their true colors, just like I did. The revelation of their deceit, the extent to which they had poisoned her mind against me, was a bitter pill. But it also cemented my conviction that I had done the right thing. My obsession with uncovering the truth had led me here, to this moment of vindication. The aftermath wasn't a Hollywood ending. There were no tearful reconciliations, no heartfelt apologies. My parents, true to form, retreated into their self-righteous indignation, refusing to acknowledge their wrongdoing. They saw me as the villain, the ungrateful child who dared to challenge their authority. But their narrative no longer defined me. The legal battle had been brutal, draining me emotionally and financially, but the justice I received was a balm to wounds that had festered for decades. I used the inheritance not to flaunt my victory, but to build a life on my own terms. I invested in a small business, something I'd always dreamed of, something that was entirely mine. The journey had stripped away the illusion of a loving family, replacing it with a stark, painful reality. Yet, in its place, I found a strength I never knew I possessed. I learned to trust my instincts, to advocate for myself, and to understand that true family isn't always defined by blood. Sarah, to her credit, eventually reached out again, not with an apology for their actions, but for her own inaction. We started slowly, rebuilding a fragile bridge across the chasm their parents had created. It was a bittersweet process, acknowledging the lost years, the missed connections, but also finding solace in the possibility of a different future. The scars remained, a permanent reminder of the betrayal, but they no longer dictated my path. Looking back, the resentment that had consumed me, the betrayal that had shattered my world, the obsession that had driven me, all culminated in this moment of profound justice. It wasn't about revenge in the destructive sense, but about reclaiming my narrative, my worth, and my future. The closure wasn't a neatly tied bow, but a hard-won piece, earned through fire and resilience. I finally understood that walking away from what hurt me wasn't giving up, it was choosing myself, and that, in itself, was the greatest inheritance of all.